me go ahead and begin. I think that the introduction is to say that there's really a deeper story behind the title of what does security have to do with IT. It's really now what does security within the context of IT have to do with digital humanities. And unfortunately now I'm opening up my slides to get to that larger story. And let's see if we can get that set. And now I will go to that. Oh dear. Now I have a blank screen. No. All right. One more time we will try this. Okay. I am going to go forward all the way through because I can no longer see a chat page for this presentation, but I will try to end it such that we still have some time for questions. And thank you for having me, even under these circumstances. I put up some thoughts about what digital humanities are in the broadest sense, the curation and analytics, critical analysis of all things digital, including human-computer interaction, and the impact of the internet on humanity and the humanities is very much a part of what I believe we should all study. When I talk about the internet today, I'm really talking about not just the technology, but the law, the social norms, the market representations of it, all aspects of its appearance in our culture and what it means to us as a world historical phenomenon that's shaped by paradigm-shifting technological and market transformations with these profound impacts on law, society, and culture. We do begin, however, with the technology. It undergirds what we now think of as the internet, even if it's taken on a greater representation. And there are two aspects of the technology that I want to point out. One is the packet switching discovery. This goes back to the 1950s, simultaneously between the UK and the United States, that ultimately became the innovation that underwrites the protocols of the internet. Technologists, and commonly people know this is the transmission communication protocol over internet protocol. The concept behind it is that it is a dumb network upon which content is structured at the ends, but in and of itself, in the middle, it's agnostic. And because it is agnostic, it's a tabula rasa, if you will. It relies on protocols that don't distinguish between good or bad in any context, storage, transmission, content. And the internet becomes a canvas upon which we throw the totality of our representations and behaviors of humanity. I put a little Latin in there since you're in Rome. I thought that you would appreciate a reference to the philosopher Terence of the Roman Republic. And this notion that there's nothing human that is foreign to me is very familiar to us even now in the 21st century. It's part of our fascination with the internet, where we throw ourselves upon this canvas with varying degrees of self-consciousness. We watch, observe, record all of these interactions. And it's fascinating because in this new representation, we watch it happening in a way that we may not notice in physical space anymore, or it's more difficult to be self-conscious about that identification. And this includes even the most depraved aspects of humanity as well as its most blessed. The security, or the lack thereof, on the internet begins with a very standard definition of what internet security means. Tech people will, I'm sure, want to go to sleep on the first point because they hear it so repeatedly. But if you're not a tech person, the go-to line about security is that it must allow for availability, integrity, and confidentiality of the data and information. There are some old but meaningful concepts or saws that people often will say about security. I can make anything secure if I can lock it down, but it will no longer be available. Gives you something of the balance. In a network system, security is only as good as the weakest link, and this is perhaps one of the largest challenges any network faces in trying to maintain a secure network, because just like in physical space, a house, you could have all of your doors well locked, but if you've got a window that has a small latch, then it's going to present a problem. And humans are the weakest link. Study after study demonstrates it is hardly ever the technology that is at fault when there is a security breach. It's often a human error that's in the mix. We have then, as a result, security that as a technical matter, and it incorporates all of these principles of information security, privacy, regulatory compliance, risk management. It is an integral component to the digital humanities. In other words, if we don't operate with at least a minimum of security, we really can't achieve our missions in research and teaching. We need the integrity of the research material, the availability of network systems, computing, collections for research, and confidentiality for the regulatory compliance, privacy, and autonomy of the academic enterprise. It is then, even if it is imperfect, and it is, a bulwark against all the forces of evil, so to speak, on the internet. There are three principal types of cybersecurity attacks. The advanced persistent threats. These are nation-state attacks, and I think really the most challenging of the three, because when you've got nation states attacking each other and standing up defenses as if we were in a cyber war, and we are, without any governance, I don't even hardly know where to begin with trying to sort that challenge out. Then in addition, we have a multi-billion-dollar enterprise of organized crime that do all kinds of malfeasance, identity theft. In the United States, we've had a run on false Internal Revenue Service returns. A person goes and puts in their return only to find the hacker, the organized crime entity, has already filed one for them and gotten a nice little pile of money back. And it has created tremendous problems for those who are affected by it. And the hacktivists, and these are international security breaches for all kinds of political purposes, and I'm sure you've heard of them, the WikiLeaks, Anonymous, Aaron Schwartz in this country, for example. I suppose there are types that could be found, but most security threats can be categorized according to these three. And technology, security, privacy, corporate activism is now newly on the scene, with the Apple iPhone case being a great example. We have on the one hand the supremacy of technology in the form of encryption that allows no exceptions to personal access. That's the position Apple has put forth. And it results in the creation of evidence-free zones, which is an unprecedented development in the history of U.S. law enforcement. The idea that there are places for technological reasons that law enforcement or the government can't go, as a historian and a lawyer, I've never heard of anything like this before. It may happen, but it's never been instantiated in the law to have that effect. And in some ways, I think there may be a displacement of very legitimate concerns about U.S. electronic surveillance. But it's in a payback for this overreach that the United States has had at least since 9/11, and the laws and technological advances since that point. But it's a displacement because it's not affecting the actual issue at stake about U.S. electronic surveillance. The undue burden on corporations to create access is also an interesting point, and perhaps the most legal. The question is now moot in the San Bernardino case, but the overall question of can the government ask a corporation to initiate processes and write code in order to create access is not as new as the notion of an evidence-free zone, but it is still one that we need to pay attention to, because in law that will be the point upon which the debate occurs in a court. And then finally, there's the question of due process and public trust and the balance of privacy and security in law enforcement. I'm not always in favor of reducing privacy and security to this notion of a balance. It seems to be a two-dimensional concept, doesn't bring in all the fullness of it, but I think you get the point that we have to have due process be in balance, and technology has to be in balance with due process. This may be the area upon which people want to ask questions when we're done, and so perhaps we can go ahead and and look forward to questions about that. The legal issues is a cultural comment. You know, what is the practical meaning of security in a contemporary global society? The metaphorical meaning. What does this conversation about security tell us about the nature of the human condition? And of course, here is where the digital humanities counts. And how is it the same, or how is it different from the Republic of Rome in the Age of Terence, for example, to the 21st century and what we deal with today on a global canvas? So there are many meanings of security: the role of technical security in the history of networking, its evolution over time in relationship to the different forms that surround it. Institutional settings, information security is a foundational component of risk management that we must maintain awareness and the strongest work in order just to support our academic missions. And then there are these larger legal and cultural concepts about the telling reflection on the larger canvas of how security and the internet play within our lives. I mentioned before the most challenging aspect of advanced persistent threats, the nation-state threats, is the lack of global internet governance. And so it would seem to me that what we need to do is go forward with a concept of that kind of administrative and political choice. We really would have to have some form of global conversation and governance structure in order to make any of this work. And so finally, I would say that with consumer privacy being enshrined in encryption and government electronic surveillance now a balance, the viability of our missions resting on an undeclared cyber war among nation states, further undermined by organized criminals and vandals that claim political ends for their illegitimate means, security has become not merely a technical fixture in this world historical phenomenon called the internet, but a meme, a symbol, and a metaphor for our times. And so I'll end with a little Shakespeare revised, the wherefore and its underlying why for. The digital humanities will interpret this temporal condition for us. So if we now could go from the slides back to the presentation, I would be happy to take questions.
Can you hear us now?
And I'm waiting for...
What shape would a global...
you were not unable to see the slides, is that right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. What shape would a global government of the internet take?
Mi dispiace molto. Well, with the oral presentation of it, yes. What shape would global governance of the internet take? I have a suggestion to the world. I can think of no better institution globally than higher education to facilitate this conversation and debate. I think if we really want to have the most disinterested coordination of concepts around global internet governance, we would do very well to ask our institutions of higher education to stand up as leaders to facilitate that debate. I'm not suggesting that colleges and universities are devoid of their national politics or regional and so forth, but I do think that there is something to the academic mission that would put us in a place where we could have a conversation and help political leaders and others to facilitate a conversation about how we would structure internet governance. You know, the United States still has control over the root servers, and this is a significant political point with other entities, largely expressed through the United Nations, that would like the United States to turn over that power. The Internet Corporation of Assigned Names and Numbers, known as ICANN, is still in place, even though the Department of Commerce, which is an agency in the United States government, has said for some time now that they would like to relinquish that control and have it diversified in some other international context. It doesn't happen. And that doesn't happen for some good reasons. Like the United States or not, it is at this point still a very secure place. I hope that lasts through our presidential election. But we have a certain kind of stability that allows the internet to keep operating, and there's a concern that if it is dispersed to other entities, that type of stability may be at risk. However, that should not be enough of a reason for us to try to understand how we could create this international kind of internet governance. And so again, I return to the theme that it is a topic I would hope very much that institutions of higher education around the world can begin to facilitate a serious conversation on that topic.
Questions?
Other thoughts? I would, in fact, then return the question to all of you, given that this is a unique audience of people who operate internationally. How could you imagine that even the American universities abroad could be working within your countries and communities to offer thoughts as to how we could structure that kind of conversation going forth? Does anyone have any ideas? I have long been very interested in working with AMICAL and American universities abroad because of their unique nature in this space. And so if anyone among you has some thoughts about it, that would be a great benefit for us to hear and think about.
Anyone? Anyone?
Unfortunately, I still can't hear anything that you are all saying. If you could type your thoughts into the chat room, I am able to see that.
I think mine's too long. I was going to say that American University of Paris is
And
giving.
I see that my friend Anne Burrell may have a thought. I'm looking forward to seeing it come up in the chat.
AUP is giving Supreme Court Justice Breyer an honorary degree this spring. And he came to speak last week and talked a lot about the internationalism of the rule of law. And I'm thinking that we all can have a part of that, and I don't know what you think as a lawyer. Justice Breyer, you better tell her, B-R-E-Y-E-R, because she'll know he's...
Yes, international rule of law, yes.
B-R-E-R.
I do think, Anne, if I have your question, yes, our Chief Justice, not Chief Justice, but Associate Justice Breyer on the United States Supreme Court is the one justice who has been most respectful and thoughtful about international law. Justice Scalia, for example, was not. He was probably the least appreciative, at least in terms of his expression of it. Maybe Thomas and some of the others share his opinion. It would be fantastic if we could get that fifth justice on the Supreme Court appointment such that we might be able to start respecting international law in this space. Because American exceptionalism, it doesn't work under any circumstances. It's a fantasy, I think. So in order for us to talk seriously about how to address questions of cyber war in an international context, we have to lose that American exceptionalism and find ways in which we can trust the representations of other nations, other peoples within nations, and have the right kind of representative global governance. I would like to see our presidential candidates, even in this cycle, talking about the internet. I asked rhetorically, a blog that I write for Inside Higher Ed, an online higher education journal that comes out of Washington in the United States. And I asked this question of which of candidates are talking about the internet in our election cycle. And it turns out that if you look at the long scope of it, the candidate that has ever talked about the internet in a truly meaningful way is the one that's already in the White House. And it's a shame in my view, that we keep looking backwards in the United States. So much of our governance in this election season has been about what we're going to do to keep people out, or what we're going to do in order to help the industrial worker. With all compassion and understanding for the industrial worker, that way of life has already passed. If more than 100 years ago we were to look at political and social unrest in the United States, the populist movement was an excellent representation of it. And by the turn of the last century, that movement had exhausted itself because that way of life, which was primarily rooted, the political economy and agriculture, was passing towards industrialization. And so the thoughts that we could have had to help the populists who had very legitimate grievances but missed the larger scope of what they were grieving about was a transition to industrialization that would have included urbanization, it would have included an acceptance of immigration. We're having a very similar occasion in the United States at this juncture. But now the transition is from an industrial political economy to an information political economy. That is the foundation of the global economy at this point. Of course, we still have agriculture, but it's industrialized. And of course, we still have industry, but it's increasingly recognized through information technologies. The most important commodity in the world right now is information. And you only would need to look at a Google or a Facebook in order to appreciate that point. So the rhetoric that we've had trying to revive an era that is already past has been a very, very unfortunate focus. And I would hope very much that at least one of our presidential candidates, maybe after the conventions, will jump out of the box and begin to talk about how we are going to ready the United States and the world for this information political economy, because we still do not have a sense of what laws will be appropriate for it, what social norms are appropriate, how much privacy to anticipate and expect, for example, since privacy is such a fungible concept rooted in culture, in its relevance in every society, what degree of security is appropriate and how we could exercise that on an with international scope. It's unfortunate. So if the United States cannot seem to take the lead in talking about how to create digital and information intelligence, digital and information fluency for our students, then I hope we can have representation from institutions such as yours, pressing those topics. It's the only way we're going to be able to address the ability to educate the numbers, the millions of people, probably billions once you add it up, of young people who need education globally. If we can't get the competencies that they need to participate in this global internet communication, commerce, and content environment, we will continue to see the kind of political unrest that is so tragic. And so I leave it up to education to create that conversation. I leave it up to our colleges and universities to, instead of always be reactive, we should take the lead in saying we can help at least frame the issues that need to be discussed. We can help facilitate a conversation that needs to take place. We have the tools, education, both the thing itself in terms of our libraries and our technology. But in addition to the education, we also know the process of how to educate people. And finally, and most important, we have the kernel of what education means in every respect to an individual person who is able to enjoy it and advance their life, to an individual person who maybe doesn't want to become the next billionaire, but just wants to be able to learn how to learn in a way that is meaningful for themselves and for all the other people in their lives that they want to touch. We have what the world needs, and I don't think we should be hiding our light under a bushel, but really putting it forth. And I truly could not imagine a better organization to bring these questions forth than those involved in higher education abroad. We have at least the consistency of language. We have at least the consistency of the institutional accreditation structure that harmonizes our concepts and the structure of our schools and colleges. We should leverage all that foundation towards a goal that is really worthy of all of our strengths globally, as well as for each nation state. Oh, my mic was scratching on my shirt. I'm so sorry about that. I should have held it out a bit. We have many technical lessons that we're learning today.
Any other comments?
Is there another question? Oh, Breyer was given an honorary degree at the American University of Paris. That is wonderful. Great. Well, thank you very much. And again, I am so sorry for the technical interruptions, but even at this, I hope we've been able to have a conversation, and would look forward to seeing all of you again sometime face to face. Thank you.